Okay, hello everybody. Welcome along this afternoon. It's great to have you here on another Thursday, having a bit of a go at higher order thinking today, and I guess how we can use it in a way that the great Ari de Hoos, and who I'm often quoting in the learning space, who said that the ability to learn faster than our competitors may just be the only sustainable competitive advantage. And I would contend that what de Hoos was possibly talking about was not just speed in terms of being able to cram more into our craniums. I think that what de Hoos was getting at was, can we learn more deeply? Can we learn in a more useful way? And can we, I guess, get ourselves into this notion of higher order thinking in a way that it actually changes things in our organisations and our businesses. Now, to actually prepare ourselves for taking on the task of thinking more deeply about higher order and getting our people to do more interesting and more creative and, to be honest, more wonderful things, we have to actually first of all begin by understanding that what we need to do is to change the way we view education. And I really am someone who's a devout and passionate advocate of great education. I despair sometimes at the reductive approach, I suppose, that we've taken to education, where I think that we've reduced the way we view education to a commodity. And education isn't a commodity. It isn't something that you can just pay for. It isn't something that you can just receive from another person as a result of handing over either your time or your money. Education done right is not a transactional situation. It's a transformational opportunity. And what I believe is that for us to be clear about trying to step out of the transactional into the transformational means that we are determined that education needs to have a higher level of output, needs to be it needs to be a more accountable process for us. So I would contend very strongly that education needs to be something that leaves your people more capable. They need to be more inclined to doing interesting and difficult work. They need to be more motivated. And as a result, it actually changes them and they become more creative as a result of education. Now, I would contend to you that unless they do, we aren't actually achieving that great competitive advantage that de Hoos was talking to for us. So for me, it's hugely important that when we are looking to not only, I guess my title here is around higher order thinking and how to build creative, thoughtful team members. But what I want us to do is, first of all, as leaders, understand that what we need to do is change our own thinking first and to expect more from education and therefore to put more into that system. So really important for us, I think, to get our own headspace right first. So there's a lot in that. And I want to admit, I guess, first up in preparing today's webinar, that what I realised was that I was defying my own advice. In preparing it, I found myself hating myself, to be really honest, for just a few moments. Because what I did was I started to realise that I was preparing. I'm just going to check that. There, we're back on track there. What I realised I was doing was preparing the education experience for you today in a way that I don't normally. And I actually think that every rule is there to be broken. I was a bit of a rebellious student and probably someone that drove my own educators a little bit bonkers from time to time. But I actually believe that every method or principle is useful until it's not. And so today what I wanted to do was, rather than just give you the principles behind higher order thinking, what I wanted to do was to make it really practical. So some of the activities that I've given you that I'm providing for you today have a lot of text on the screen, and that's me breaking a rule that I have for myself around PowerPoint, which is that it don't work if there's a lot of text on the screen. But what I want to do is particularly reward the people who've come along to the webinar today by making sure that the screenshots that you're able to take today and the slide deck that we'll make available to you are useful for you after the webinar. So you'll be able to actually go and steal those activities and to take the text directly from them. So I approached the webinar today with a sense of self-loathing, and it is around the notion that, that what I'm doing is providing not only a learning experience for you all who've come along today, but I'm also providing a resource, and I hope that's a useful resource for you moving forward. Now, the whole notion of getting people into a higher order level of thinking means we're going to cover off on 3 principles very quickly, but it may feel like, because I've laden these slides with text, that there's a little bit of information overload, a little bit of too much information, as my teenage children would say to me, TMI, Dad, TMI. And so what I want you to be aware of, first of all, is that we can make sense of that information today. So I want to point you to the control panel that you can see on your screen, and let you know that there's a couple of ways that you can get involved in the webinar today. First of all is through either the question or the chat boxes, as whichever version of software you've got available to you. You may even have both. So you've got the opportunity to ask a question during the webinar today. Whack that in there if you think that there's something that we can make sense of it for your current ambitions and what you're currently working on. And also, I guess, even from a technical point of view, we have my wonderful business manager, Chris, in the background today. And if you're even having some issues accessing the webinar today, if there's some sound or some video problems that you might be having, then just feel free to pop that question in there as well, and she'll take care of that today. Like any old school classroom, and I guess this ain't no old school classroom, but like any classroom, you've also got the facility to put your hand up today as well. So look for that little symbol that looks like a palm of a hand. And if you press that one, then I actually, from my end, have the ability to unmute you. So you could even ask a question verbally rather than writing it. And I guess I always, from a learning perspective, some people get shy about doing that. Because I think, oh, well, what would my problems matter to other people? I'll just be interrupting. I actually think when you ask a question, you are of wonderful service to the other people in the room. And what I guess has been my experience, my lived and worked experience, has been that when someone does ask a question, that other people in the room have tended to be sitting there hoping that someone would ask that question, because it's a question for them too. So if you think you can contribute in that way, then please make sure you take avail of that control panel. Live with the overload, and we'll show you at the end how you can step a little further into learning more about this and give you more information about it. I guess where I want to start today is just by identifying, I love the wonderful Captain Risky, and there's a risk required for you to take in terms of taking people on a journey into different levels of learning. And like I said, the reductionist view of education, where it's a transaction, where I give up either my time or my effort and you deliver something for me, is deeply entrenched, not only, sadly, in our schools, but also in our workplaces and businesses and organisations. And when you try to change the way that people learn, you will find resistance. Anytime that we try to take on a new skill or a new way of doing things, there is always a little component within everybody that resists it. I'm not sure that I want to do it this way. Or there is a component within your staff, within your team, who fully resist, who just go, no, that's not the way I learn. And I want to dispel myths around that straight away, because one of the things that unfortunately has pervaded the education landscape over the last few years has been people saying that there are learning styles, and there are certain, I'm an auditory learner, I'm a visual learner, I'm a kinesthetic learner, and it's all nonsense. We all have slight preferences, but we are all incredibly capable of learning in a multitude of different ways. And sometimes our preferences are incredibly context specific. So we're going to change that. All of those ways of learning are very valid, and all of us are quite capable within them. But when we do encourage people to learn at a higher level, what we get is people pushing back against that, because we're creatures of comfort. We like things done a certain way. And when those habits have become entrenched, as long as our educative habits have, and let's be honest, we start building those when we're around 4 years of age, then people push back. I know that my own, just to get anecdotal on you for a moment, my own experience was when I was a school principal, I decided for my school to change the way that we did homework. The research around homework was basically that the traditional regimes for a primary school were that it really alienates from the love of learning the kids who most need to love learning and have the least support at home. It's a significant distraction for teachers. teachers who have to, mark these black line masters in their lunch period when they should be planning great learning experiences. And it really drives parents a bit crazy because they need to then sit up until 1:30 in the morning making scale models of paper mache volcanoes. And so no one was winning out of this scenario, so we decided to change it. But when we did, the local media got wind of our school, and before we knew it, we were on the front page of the local newspaper under the heading "School Bans Homework." That article got syndicated across every state and territory in Australia and went internationally to 15 countries. There were several Facebook pages set up about my school with some really nasty comments made about us. And the Today Show even managed to run a poll on whether crazy ideas like this were what's wrong with Australian schools. It was a harrowing kind of time, and I didn't realise that the pushback would be so severe. Yet we got our way through that. And after a couple of weeks, when that newspaper becomes tomorrow's fish and chip wrapper, what we found was that the notion and the theory and the point that sat behind all of the mess and the commotion remained so strongly that every other school in the area picked up that way of working and picked up that policy for homework and made it their own, which is lovely. They got to do that without having broken through. Of course, in business, I guess the lesson here is that you can either be the first and take full benefit from that before everybody else and become renowned for taking that full benefit, or you can wait until it's become completely normal again. And you're playing, I guess, in that regard, a game of educational catch-up all the time. So my contention to you is that if you're looking to change the way people learn, then be first. Be first. Go ahead and change it. Just be ready for the risk required that sits inherent within that, and ride it out. Write it out. Every shift requires a leader somewhere who sticks the chest out and lets a few bullets bounce off, and puts up with some nasty criticism, perhaps even in newspapers, and although hopefully it's not quite that severe for you, and then other people catch on. And I'm certainly glad that in my time in schools that we were often the first, and we got some scars for that, but we also did some really fantastic things that gave us, in that market, competitive advantage also. So today's webinar, what I'm going to do is work you through 3 steps, 3 considerations, if you will, that will allow you to transform your people as smoothly as you possibly can from that transactional lower order approach to learning across into that transformational higher order concept. So let's get started. The first one is one that I actually wrote about in a newsletter a couple of weeks ago, and it is about how the best way to get people into higher order thinking, more creative, more accountable, more design-oriented thinking, is to connect them in teams. So learning teams equal connected teams. And the best, I guess, the trap that we often have around getting people connected is we think that we need to break the ice. If you bring new people together, or if you've got a team that's not getting on, what we'll do is we'll do an icebreaker. And it does my head in, to be totally honest, because I've never been in a learning environment where the output of the work that we've done after the learning has been enhanced by our capability to pass a balloon between our knees before the other team does. I think they're kind of benign icebreakers where we don't learn anything about each other. We don't learn anything about what makes each other tick, and anything that we do find out isn't leverageable, which means we can't use it when we're actually deeply and significantly in the learning environment. So what I want to contend to you is that we need to go beyond icebreakers. We can go one step beyond, or we can go one leap beyond. So one step beyond would be useful without being particularly transformational. Useful in that, if you just find out things about each other, so you run those little icebreaker games where you try to find someone else in the room who has been to a holiday destination internationally that's the same place as you. And look, it's nice to find out that, there's another person in the room that stayed at the same resort in Bali. You find something out about each other, which is useful in terms of creating an environment that for instance, is a counter workplace bullying environment. So what we know about bullying is that the number one protective factor against bullying is knowing things about each other, even better if they're the things that we have in common. Funnily enough, it's not having a speaker come in on a Wednesday afternoon and tell you about not bullying. So what you need to do is to create a culture where people are genuinely and personally connected. If you want to take that culture into leap mode, then I suggest what we really need to do is to go deeper than just sharing something benign in common and actually find out what makes each other tick. So if you're going to invest any time in icebreakers or in team development, then can I make the suggestion that you start to get fair income about it? One of my favourite activities that I do, I'll share with you 3 different activities today that are my anti-icebreakers, the ones that I think that, you know, really cleverly get people to find out what makes each other's tick. And the first one is this one called What Do You Value? And all I do is I give people these 10 potential values and ask them to just really quickly, I give them the list and I go, could you just put numbers next to all of them? So could you rank them from number 1 being the most important value to you through to number 10? And I get them to then, okay, they've got basically a minute to do that. Then they jump up and we might go for a bit of a wander around the room while there's a little bit of music, and 30 seconds later the music stops. And then you just have to go to the person nearest or jump into a group of 3 or even a group of 4. And what you need to do is explain your thinking. So instead of saying that, you know, my number 1 is world peace, number 2 is wisdom, we don't really care about the order. What we care about is the way you think. And so we asked them, for instance, to just even explain, you know, what is it about these that made you rank them that way. So I'm wondering here, first of all, I'm wondering even if we've got enough people on the webinar today to be able to do this. Give me a bit of an idea. If you can, go to the question box that you've got on your screen there and just pop your number 1 in. Just pop your number 1 in. And then if you've got a moment, pop number 1, press return. And then if you can, give me another idea about what made you choose that. What was that all about for you? You know, for me, I know I'm going to, you know, reveal my hippie self here, which if you knew me wouldn't be the case. You might not think was the case, but mine's world peace. I've got a big thing about connectivity and other people and bringing people together. And, you know, so for me, I guess I would write world peace. And then what my reasoning is that I love the idea of contributing to an interconnected world, of people working together towards a common goal that's a satisfactory thing for all. So it'd be something like that. So thank you, Michelle, for letting her know her health is the most important one for Michelle. And if you've got one for you, then just pop that in that box. It'd be really great to know. And what's amazing is you get to find out information that's, for me, leverageable later on. I think about thinking about what makes other people tick. And I go back to thinking about a staff member that I had called Amali. And Amali, if she's out there, Amali, I still love you. But Amali and I butted heads, and I was the leader, and she was the worker. I was the principal. She was the teacher. And every time I presented something at a staff meeting, Amali would stand up and immediately shoot it down and tell me the 3 reasons it would fail. And it got to the point where I was taking it personally. I was actually starting to go, you know what, I don't like Amali. Amali really annoys me. And then I actually went, okay, and I asked myself just that basic question: what makes her tick? And what does she not like? What does she not like about the way that I'm doing things? And what it was that Amali had an issue, I suppose, with being ambushed. She didn't like somebody to come up with a wonderful idea without any consultation. And so it wasn't the content I was delivering, it was the fact that I was constantly ambushing her and potentially others on the staff, but, you know, Amali was the one who spoke up. So when I thought, okay, I think that's what it's all about. I think that's what makes Amali tick. So what I needed to do instead was 2 days before I was going to present something at the staff meeting was to email my intentions and my plan to Amali, who would write back to me with those very 3 reasons it would fail. and I would take them into account and then adjust accordingly. And by the time I delivered it in the staff meeting, it was basically Amali's idea. And that was how we were able to get on the same page. It wasn't actually an issue for Amali with what I was presenting. It was the fact that I was having it appear out of nowhere as though there was no possible way for her to impact the direction of it. Just thinking about the way that people tick is really important. Thank you also to Kim and Gabriella, who've jumped in there with family security and helping others, and their reasoning for that as well. I guess for me, if I was going back over this, I'd be starting to think about what are those reasons, you know. Michelle has written that her choice for health is that all others follow on from health. If you don't have health, it's difficult to achieve the others. Gabriella says that she chose helping others because if you always give, you always get so much more. So Gabriella's view obviously is that I need to contribute as much as I possibly can. It's an investment kind of approach where if I invest, then I can get a fair bit back from my people. You know, all of that tells me a little bit about the way that the people in our webinar today tick, and I can use that information to ensure that we collaborate more effectively later on. Sounds a bit manipulative, but people really like to be in those productive teams. The next anti-icebreaker, I call this one, how do you want to be remembered? So what's the word that would go on your gravestone, if you will? You know, well, how do you want people to describe you when you're gone, when you're either gone to another realm or perhaps hopefully just to another workplace? And what this does is it gets us into the realm of thinking about, probably shouldn't use that word, it gets us into the notion of thinking about behavioural motivation. It gets us into thinking not only what values we have, but what drives us, what are the drivers that sit behind the behaviours we choose. And within every one of these 10 possibilities for people, and again, I just get them to rank them from the most important through to the least important to them. And if you feel like popping that in the question box, you can too today. That'd be really lovely. What it gets me to do is I can see within their people's choices both the opportunities and the risks. So there are opportunities sitting behind there's no negative ones here. So there's no, you know, what I value is I want people to remember me as being aggressive. So nobody chooses a word like that. So all of them have some positive connotation, but there's a risk attached to all of them. So for instance, if I was to say that I'm motivated by being successful, I want people to remember me as being successful. The strength that comes from that is somebody who's big on short timelines. So they're wonderful with progress and they want to see progress and they want to be recognised for that progress. So if you want something done quickly, you give it to somebody who's motivated by success because they want to get to that opportunity to be patted on the back or to go past that marker very quickly. They highly productive people who are motivated by success. If you're looking for people, if people say that they want to be remembered as being honest, then they're wonderful people to put in things like customer experience, because what they do is a great job of building trust with the customer. So if you're looking for solutions around customer experience, then looking for people in your team that articulate for themselves that they want to be remembered as honest is a great way to do it. And if you're looking for, if people, for instance, if they say they want to be remembered as smart, then they're great for creating new products. They're great for looking at ways to disrupt the marketplace and looking for new ways to solve problems that are kind of, as much as this expression grates against me, that are a little outside the box, that are not the usual way of doing things. So if you feel like you've sort of hit a bit of a rut, then these people who want to be remembered as smart are great people to engage in finding a better way forward. But there's a risk attached to all of them. So for instance, those successful people, they sometimes are so motivated by the quick win that they're not great at hard work. They're not great at long-term sustained effort. So know that about them. They can get frustrated when projects don't get completed quickly. And I guess the flip of even somebody that says that they want to be independent is that sometimes they're telling you that I don't like my workmates. I don't like having to work in groups. I don't like having to take on collaborative projects. So their ability to collaborate can sometimes be compromised. Now, I'm going to contend to you that that's not something you work around. It's something you have to address. It's something that is better dealt with by helping someone build some collaborative skill, and I want to talk about that in the webinar today. And I guess to give you one more little activity as an anti-icebreaker, which is called Have a Heart. And boy, be ready. If you're going to run Have a Heart, then I want you to be ready for the level of argument that will come from the people that they're working with. And it's amazing how invested people can become in 5 people that don't exist. So Have a Heart is saying that you and your team members, and I'm going to suggest that getting people together in groups of around 4 is the best way to do it. And they're the board members of a judicial panel in a hospital, and they have to determine the priority order of 5 candidates for heart transplants. And what you need to do is to work out what the order is, but because we are tempting the emotion in here. So what we're doing here with this icebreaker is we're tempting people to see whether the emotion overcomes their intention to work together a little bit. And hopefully they can see some of that for themselves as they work. So we're asking them, can they stick to team norms when conflict comes? And or where disagreement comes, and can they do it so well that they actually validate each other's thoughts and feelings along the way? I can see why you have thought about it this way, or I can see why you might make that choice. What I'd like to counter is with this argument to see if it impacts your choice. That's a respectful way to argue, rather than, you have got to be kidding me. How could you choose George? He's a criminal. You know, it's an absolute joke that you would do that. I can't believe you would choose George. I think that's just so outside your value set, and I don't know what you're talking about today. Because from there, it's hard to get productive. So we're asking our people when we run an activity like this, can you stick to the team norms? I think it was one of the great philosophers of the 20th and 21st century, Mike Tyson, who said everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. So everyone has the intention to work together really well until conflict comes along. And so what I really love about those 3 activities that I've put to you today is that I think the first one, what you do is you find out what people's values are, which again is leverageable. The second thing you find out is what their behavioural drivers are. And with the third one, what you tend to find out is how they prioritise. These are all deeply leverageable pieces of knowledge, which is why I think they're so much more productive in terms of people getting up into higher order levels of thinking, because to be honest, lower order icebreakers like passing balloons between our knees encourage us into that transactional mode. Really get to know each other, really connect your teams, and you kind of prepare the soil for people to do more creative work, which is, I think, a huge part of the problem, a huge part of the challenge, I should say. Step 2. And as a leader, it's really about asking better questions. Now, we have habit around the way that we ask questions, because this, to be really honest, it sounds really simple, just ask better questions. But we have habit around this, and we tend to ask closed questions for which there's either a yes or no, binary kind of questions, or we ask questions that there's a simple answer to that people can either be right or wrong around. And that doesn't generate solutions. So when we ask better questions that begin with different verbs, I want to unpack them for you in a minute, what we get, and this is why actually, the picture even that's on the screen here is rather, I think it's a little bit prophetic, and it reminds us that when we ask the right questions, we actually start to get us on a path towards some really fantastic ideas, some really clever light bulb moments. So better questions lead to bigger ideas, they lead to deeper solutions, they lead to better product development, and to be honest, better questions lead to creative answers rather than closed answers. So let me give you a bit of an idea about what I mean by asking better questions. Oh, we've got a little issue around colour there. We can work through that. Low-level learning imperatives ask questions like they want people to label something, or to copy something, or to record something, or to explain something. They kind of lend themselves really neatly to that transactional view of education and learning, where what you do is present somebody some information and we say, wonderful, can you now regurgitate it for me? doesn't require much. It's really a low-level request that we're making of our people when we ask them to just quote it or to just copy it back or to recite it for us, or even our workshop default tends to be to discuss it. So we'll say, here's a bit of information, could you turn and talk to the person and discuss it? And basically what they do is they summarise what you said in 30 seconds or so, and then they turn around and wait for you to deliver the next little piece of information, as though, almost, you know, metaphorically, as though they're the baby, the baby chicks in the nest, and your job is to come and deliver the worms. That's not what education should be about. So while sometimes it's important to establish a knowledge base, I do want to make it very clear that knowledge in this regard is, you know, focusing on knowledge is a habit of learning. And we have to acknowledge, I guess, even when we move towards what I would call the mid-level learning imperatives, and for some reason we've again got some of these that have reverted to black on me. These mid-level learning imperatives, we start to realise that knowledge is actually broken. The delivery of knowledge is no longer something that any educator should solely focus upon. Because what you do is you pay no respect to a little invention that happened 30 odd years ago called the internet, which broke knowledge. It made it possible for you to access almost any knowledge in the world. You can go and find out whatever you want to find out about your competitors. You can find out what you want to know about your collaborators, and you can bring that to your workplace. That's not what the world's demanding of you. What the world is demanding of you is that you use that knowledge, that you can discriminate between those, between knowledge that is useful and knowledge that is useless. The University of Phoenix's Institute for the Future calls it cognitive load management. The ability to run a Google search and to know that the first 7 or 8 are probably paid for, and then after that to be able to look at the search responses that you've had and kind of say useful, useless, 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 useful. That's the bit that I need. So you're asking people to apply that knowledge, to, you know, actually do something with it, and to categorise it, to critique it, to analyse it, to have a bit of a look and ask ourselves that question about, okay, here's knowledge. Is it useful or is it useless? And we're going to have a little bit of a look there at their ability to use that with some sort of capability. I guess the last one here, and this is where I really want to encourage us, so traffic light wise, we've gone from red to amber to green. What I want us to do, though, as leaders, is to start asking questions that begin with these verbs. So I want to ask people, we go, can you design this? Can you hypothesize how this might be useful in our team? Can you use this information to make a recommendation about the way that we need to move forward? Can you create, can you rank? So even those little icebreakers that we did before encourage people to get into a higher order level of thinking, because we're asking them to rank things. You know, that's easier than actually just accepting them. Sorry, that's more difficult, more challenging than asking them to accept them. So what we get is new ways and things that come out of it when we ask people this way. We get disruption because we're actually going to change the way we do things when we think in a higher order way. We stand out. And to be honest, I think that's where this loops back a little to Hoose's competitive advantage, where this is the only way we get competitive advantage, is not to know more than the opposition, but it's about being able to do more awesome stuff than the opposition with what we know. So I'm constantly asking people to invent something with this piece of information, to design a new way forward, to compose a better process for handling this situation. And what I find is I start to find out things that are outside my expectations. So one of the world's most wonderful educators, a fellow called Professor Sugata Mitra, calls this emergent phenomena. It's where we put the conditions in place just by you asking the right questions. We put these conditions in place that things happen that we couldn't have possibly imagined. And it's exciting. It's really exciting when those things do start to happen. One of my favourite activities, and people who know me will know that may even be aware of this one, is that I can take people through those 3 phases: lower order, mid-level, and then higher order thinking with chicken nuggets. So my first question to them is, what's the most common number of nuggets in fast food restaurants that go into the small, medium and large boxes? Because nearly all of them have a small, medium and large box. And the combo there that you're looking for them to come up with is 6, 9 and 20. All they have to do is recall. So the verb I'm asking them to do there is to recall what they think is the most common number, and it's 6, 9, and 20. Then I ask them to apply a mid-level question. So I want them to apply that knowledge. I ask them, if it's 6, 9, and 20 in a fast food restaurant, what's the highest number of nuggets that I can't order? So they go through, oh, you can't order 5, but there's got to be a bigger number than that. Well, you can't order 11. Well, there's got to be a bigger number than that. Because once you get to a certain point, some combo of 6s, 9s, and 20s will get you there. And the answer is 43. But they really start to problem solve with the knowledge that they found through the first question. And then I go, there's another level here. There's another level. And that's what I want them to do now, is to, in one of those higher order verbs, is to recommend. So what I'd like you to do now is to think about opening your own fast food restaurant. And you're going to have a small, medium, and large nugget box. But what I want you to do is to recommend for me what market and mathematical forces we should consider when we're thinking about what number of nuggets to put in the small, medium, and the large. And people have this really deep, interesting conversation about how many nuggets they think people are most likely to buy. Should we consider families? And is there a difference between male and female? Is there a time of the day consideration to take into account here? You know, is there a prime number? I don't know how prime numbers come into this, but is there a prime number consideration that we should be making? And it's fascinating to watch the deep and the high level of thinking that comes about just because I ask them to recommend rather than just to apply, and then rather than just a boring old recall. It's really amazing where people will get to if you give them that opportunity and then tell them that for our business, we're going to be asking questions like recommend rather than recall when it comes to our learning and development. And step three, what I want you to give some consideration to today is how we can normalise fluent collaboration. So this is about making it okay to work in a group, making it okay to benefit from collectively tackling tasks and collectively taking on creative pursuits. Because what we know about learning is that it just is more powerful when we do it in the company of other people. Even though you've got a lot of people in your organisations potentially who don't like to learn in the company of other people, we need to create an environment that helps them to step out of it, because their wisdom, even as profound as it can be sometimes, is almost useless to us in isolation. So we need to have that wisdom spread. We need to cultivate it. We need to take it viral. And so what we need to do that is to make it normal in our culture that we collaborate, and we want to make that collaboration fluent and easy for everybody. So collaboration needs to be not something we do, but it needs to be part of our DNA. It needs to be who we are. So a few ways that you might consider collaborating more effectively. First of all is to make collaboration interdependent. What I mean by that is we need each other. Now, I love this picture. This is one of my favourite pictures when I'm looking to deter, people go, what do you mean by interdependence? I mean this, that if either person here steps out, we're both in trouble. And so what I mean is like I said, we need each other to get it done. So ways that you can train people even to be ready for that opportunity is give some consideration even to just changing the way you brainstorm. So when you bring people together and ask them to brainstorm, it can be a useful thing to say, instead of just getting together and just list all the ideas that people shout out, let's give people 3 posties each and tell them that you are allowed to leverage other people's posties when they whack them up on the board, but we're not leaving here until everybody puts 3 posties up there. So to get out of that room, we need everybody in. We need everybody to do their part. And that's what interdependence needs to look like. Another wonderful collaborative learning strategy that I've used is talking chips. So if you've got people who are going to talk through a better way to do something, or a policy that needs to be written, then what you can do is give everybody 3 poker chips. And what happens is when you contribute something that you think is useful to the conversation, a sentence, you throw that chip into the middle of the table just like you would playing poker. You don't have to take turns. You don't have to take turns at all. But if you submit your 3 chips, you have to shut up. And what that means is there's no way for people to back out of the conversation, there's no way to dominate it, and there's no way for us to move on until we've done our bit. So we need each other to get the job done. Any great cooperative learning or collaborative learning approach always has an element of accountability. Now, I would contend to you that if we get people together, and as I mentioned before, groups of 4, I reckon is the best way to do it. Anytime we bring those people together, the looseness of just get together in a group and work on this encourages the human dynamic to come over the top. Now, I do want to let you know that you don't always have to have some naff or clever or funky structure to the way you learn if the existing connections are strong. So if you've done some of that team building that I talked about at the start about connecting people, sometimes it'll work really, really well, which is fantastic. The connections, I guess, are the antidotes to that human dynamic and emotion coming over the top. But if people are getting together for the first time in a team, or if they don't know each other, the human dynamic of getting 4 people together is that one of them will be the hog. So one of them will say, fantastic group work, it's my time to shine, they'll take it over. And one of them will be the log, and they will say, fantastic group work, it's my time to do absolutely bugger all. So what we need to do is to train people to work more effectively together. Now, one of the little structures that I've brought to bringing new groups together is one called Build Upon. And Build Upon involves taking an A4 sheet of paper where we ask someone to write, the group's going to discuss a particular topic, and one person has the piece of paper and they just write down in the first little box on this sheet of paper, an important idea that could help, that would be useful. There's a little line that's underneath the box which then says, which would be even better if. And once they've written that line, they hand the piece of paper to the next person, who then has to contribute something else. So what they do is they build upon the last person's idea. And what I find is that most groups, if you run an activity around, a discussion activity around a particular problem that they're going to try and solve, will get around the circle 2 or 3 times, which means that you've got maybe somewhere between 8 and 12 fantastic ideas built upon 8 to 12 times that will make the likelihood of success higher, which is really exciting. And look, I've seen this happen with even some really boring stuff. So even around your compliances, if you want to get people to talk about the new OH&S policy or the mandatory reporting or the first aid stuff that they need to know about but isn't particularly interesting, doing it with Build Upon can be a really good way to get everybody's input and understanding there, because the imperative to listen is much stronger. That's where the accountability comes in. You just can't clock off in a situation like that. You can't be the log, and you can't be the hog either, because your ability to contribute to that sheet is only once until everybody else has had their go as well. So bringing structure can really enhance those connections and enhance output. But the other side of that is that know that you don't always need a structure if you've done the work in connecting people in a meaningful way. The next one I want to point towards is what we call work, think, sharing, which is where there's 2 key principles that sit behind work, think, sharing. Which is, the first one is division of labour. So what we're talking about here is that everybody needs to have a job. Everybody needs to be committing to a close to equal percentage of the workload here. Now, the reason for that is that our habits around commitment within a group are to measure it with time and effort. Now, that isn't necessarily the best way to measure commitment, but the human dynamic is such that we tend to. So where we find that people are working harder than others or producing more than others, and when we find the converse of that is where people are working less or producing less than others, that tends to be the root of a lot of conflict when you work collaboratively. So what we want to do is to be really clear about having an explicit conversation in groups about who's doing what job and making sure that it's done. Now, the second part of that is that role clarity that comes from work, think, sharing. So it's about saying, okay, even if there are people that are, we're not all doing the same kind of work. We've got people doing different kinds of work. One person's going to do market research. One person's going to do prototype possibilities. One person's going to do, potential partners. We can have different roles, but if we're all coming back together and then piecing that together at some stage, people will feel that the work, think, sharing has been reasonably commensurate. And that's an important feature when we're looking to get people to work together as they move forward. And then the last one, the last principle, I guess, that sits behind this normalising fluent collaboration is constant activity. Now, I think that the best way to think about constant activity is a basketball match. There's 2 types of people that are involved in a basketball match. There's those that are on the court and there's those that are on the bench. And what I want you to do is to create scenarios that are far more court-like than bench-like. We don't want people waiting to become involved in this project. So we don't want to create unwieldy sequences where I'll do this, and if you can just all hold off for a moment, then then you can do your bit. Because that means that at any particular time, even in a group of 4, 75% of people are sitting on the bench waiting for someone else to do their bit. We need to create scenarios where people are active all the way through. So look, if I can give you a really basic and simple starting point around that, it would be to flip the old SWOT analysis. So instead of sitting there, okay, we're going to get a whiteboard out, we're going to put 4 boxes up there, and we're going to put a heading in the first one that says strengths. And then we're going to work through what are the potential strengths of our team and our organisation here together. And somebody at the back of the room's already asleep. They're not on the court, they've put themselves on the bench. And then they do it again when we move across to weaknesses, and again opportunities, and then again at threats. My suggestion would be to take it off the whiteboard and to create one sheet that's about strengths, one sheet that's about weaknesses, one that's about opportunities, one that's about threats, and each team member takes it. We have a 30-second discussion about what they're currently thinking, and then we have 1 minute of silence while they write down what they think, and then they pass it on to the next person, where we go 31, 31, 31 until the job's done. Now, that's an activity that's done in 6 minutes in a group of 4, and nobody sits on the bench. Everybody's active all the way through, which contributes to a much better, deeper, and built upon product, which is really exciting when that happens. So those 4 key principles, I guess I really just want you to keep in mind about collaborative learning. And they obviously are that interdependence, we have to need each other to get it done. Accountability, which means that we're no hogs and no logs. Work, think, sharing, which is about division of labour and role clarity. And then that notion of constant activity as well. We've pulled that together in what we think is a cool little cartoon.
Here's the problem. The way we learned 200 years ago is still the way we're trying to learn today. And during that time, the world has undergone some massive changes. But sadly, the way we've learned stood still. There was an issue with the old way anyway. It was all about lower order learning, the type of learning that's about remembering and perhaps regurgitating facts to prove that we got it. This type of learning is too one-dimensional, too low in expectation, and it's too reliant on the old school teacher cruelly cramming the information into our heads. Great learning is about engagement, and companies with engaged employees outperform those without by a whopping 202%. And with all the information available, shouldn't we now have higher expectations of our learners anyway? The product of a learning experience should be design, analysis, evaluation, creativity, and collaborative problem solving. And maybe even inspiring those around us to learn too. That's higher order thinking, and it's what drives modern performance. It means learning from and with each other, and not just from a guru with a slide deck. So real learners' experiences are underpinned by 4 key determinations. The first is interdependence, or actually needing each other to solve a problem, as opposed to merely competing. Accountability, where we don't have hogs taking too much of the learning fun and responsibility, or logs who are taking too little. We also incorporate what we call work, think, sharing, where we equally contribute to the learning work, and also constant activity, where we don't sit on the bench and waste time waiting to come onto the learning court to play our role. Rather than boring, this should sound busy, productive, creative, and collaborative. Your people's ability to think, to work, and to learn at higher levels will determine your growth trajectory beyond the information age. It starts with learning some new ways to learn. It's time to make...
So that's what it's all about, folks. If you've got any questions, then please feel free to pop them in the question box now. We've got a little bit of time that we could use to contextualise this a little bit for you. But while people are thinking of their questions, I'll point you towards our next webinar. Now, I ran a webinar a few months ago that I had lots of feedback on, and I was really a little bit blown away by it, to be honest, about how to construct a great learning experience. And what I'd like to do in the webinar that we're going to run in May is to then put some, I guess, some meat on the bones. So we're going to call this one Workshop Magic. And it's about what are all the little tips and tricks that just make a workshop pop. How do you design a learning experience that matters for people, that's memorable, that they go home and brag to their partners about? And so I really want to create an experience for you here where it's going to be really practical, it's going to be really funky, and it's going to be a little bit different as far as a webinar goes. But what you'll leave with is a full tool belt. The things that you can do when you have to construct a learning environment. Because I guess what I know is that when a director, for instance, comes to you and says, well, I want you to create a workshop on this, we can do this collective breathe in, because we can just feel ourselves having to spend hours designing a PowerPoint slide deck. And I reckon we can do it better, and I reckon we can do it better in some really simple, interesting and engaging ways. So I want to encourage you, when you do get the follow-up email from today, make sure you register for that one. We'd love to have you come along. This slide is a complete lie. I've made a horrible mistake, I tried to correct it, I really did. When I got into the webinar today, I realised that what I hadn't done was upload the slide deck from today's webinar to GoToWebinar. I apologise humbly. What I'm going to do is we've got our email address coming up in just a moment, and if you send an email to that address, we're going to reply with the slide deck from today. But also note that you're going to get that webinar, GoToWebinar follow-up email in the next couple of days, and if you just reply to that email, we'll send you the slide deck as well. Again, I'm so sorry. I tried so hard to get back in, but it just assumed that I'd started the webinar and wouldn't let me play the game, unfortunately. But I've learned to roll with the punches. Hey, if there's anything that you think I can do to help you with this, really happy to. These are the types of ways that we work with organisations such as yours. We worked on Friday with a TAFE Institute, and we emceed I emceed their conference day. We delivered a keynote presentation about learning differently and how you develop learning cultures, and we ran a breakout session about understanding human behaviour in the learning environment. We got some fabulous feedback from them, and if we can do work like that for you, then we stand by ready to do some really cool stuff with you. So I guess in the question box, if you'd like to have a chat about any of those, just pop that word in there and we'll happily help you out. So there's that email address. You can either email directly to me or to the info@reallearners address there, info@reallearners.com.au, and Chris will probably more swiftly than me get you that slide deck into your hands so that you can use it with your team as well. Hey, thanks so much for coming along. It's been fabulous to have you all here today. It's one of my favourite topics to talk about. I love talking about how you get people to step up into those higher levels and to create more, to do more, and to be more. So I hope that's an ambition of yours, and I hope that today's been useful for you. We'll see you next time around. Thanks so much. Bye for now.